Here we go. How's everyone doing? Thank you for tuning in to the Abilities Virtual number 2. So glad to have you here. We've been having some incredible guests, some incredible questions. Thank you guys for your well thought out questions. We love participations, and our exhibitors are loving you going and checking out the virtual exhibits, the product demos, the workshops. Thank you guys so much for supporting us. Now, if you need closed captions right at the top. You can click on there. We also want to recognize our great ASL interpreter, Charles. Thank you, Charles, for all your great work. Really appreciate it. And we're going to continue with our incredible guests. This beautiful individual right here is so knowledgeable when it comes to cannabis. She is the expert that we can talk to. We're talking about the amazing Felicia Carbajal from the Social Impact Center. Felicia, how are you, my dear?
I am excited. I was just messaging with somebody about how amazing this new platform is and like try not to get choked up, like with just the magnitude of the individuals that we're having and we pull together, like just the historic implications of being able to participate with people who like made the 88 happen and create space for activists like myself. Like honored.
Yeah, and we are
Honored.
honored to have you, Felicia. I mean, because I don't think you realize how important you are to the community and just to people in general. What you guys are doing over there at the Social Impact Center, educating us and really having a dialogue with us when it comes to cannabis. So we appreciate all that you do too, Felicia. And before we start off, I want to make sure all is well with you and things are going well during these crazy times. And it's really good to see you again. And let's start off by talking about, where is cannabis legal? We know we just had an election, and on some ballots out there in different states, there were certain measures that were passed. But where is it legal? If you can let us know about that, please.
Well, I mean, cannabis is still federally illegal. So I think that's the big thing that everyone has to remember is that independent of the different states that allow for individuals to utilize cannabis, that, federally it's still illegal. But I mean, we have the block on the West Coast, of course, where we have medical access and we have adult use. We've started seeing pockets in the Midwest. Some exciting new developments after this election are going to afford a lot of people opportunity to utilize cannabis. For the most part, I mean, I always tell people like I'm an intersectional activist, right? So as a person who got to get married during that little tiny window during Prop 8 and see how we legally captured 13 states and then the war was won in terms of being able to flip that. We're in a different dynamic here. We have like over a third of our states that have legal access, but we haven't created that shift that allows for, folks who are in places like in the Midwest to actually be able to have access to this plant. But in terms of, the question that you asked in particular, like we have new access in Montana, or no, we've had access in Montana, the Dakotas. We're seeing the shift with New Jersey in terms of opening marketplaces. We're seeing shifts all across the nation. I think when we see Texas, I'm just throwing it out there. When we see Texas make that shift in particular, I think people should get really excited because shortly after that, I would anticipate bigger and better things coming for us nationally.
And Felicia, I just want to let you know the questions are streaming in for you. You are very popular. So we'll ask this question first before we entertain some of the questions in the room. And that is, what does CBD do versus THC?
a loaded question because everybody's body is really different, right? In terms of how they respond. But the biggest distinction in terms of what normal people would say is one would make you feel intoxicated. You know, the THC might make you feel a little bit more loose or a little intoxicated, whereas CBD has a lot distinct medicinal properties with, you know, anti-inflammatory properties, where, I mean, I always tell people it's really up to your body. Like the biggest distinction is the one that we've created in our own head with prohibition. The reality is a lot of people have to try both. And, you know, some people won't get any relief with THC where they'll get the relief that they need with CBD. But it's a very individualized experience. So it's kind of hard for me to give more than the distinction of what folks would normally say. You know, THC is more of the intoxicant, or, you know, would make you high, whereas CBD has a little bit more of those relaxing, anti-inflammatory things that people associate with healing.
And Felicia, let's talk about allergies out there. Just like how there's forms of allergies that people have when it comes to different medical treatments out there. Is that the same even with cannabis?
There are a lot of people who respond differently. And there are a lot of people who can't take CBD, or there's a lot of people who can't take THC. And I know some individuals that can't take either. So I don't think there's been enough studying done. I mean, obviously, we've had that conversation because of prohibition. It's really hard to get those studies that we need. A lot of this is obviously anecdotal. So when people say that they had an allergic reaction or they had negative side effects, we'll find some studies that say that, but there's not a lot told past that.
And what about when it comes to the different edibles out there? We've heard about. I remember growing up, it was an episode of Taxi, and that's when Jim Ignatowski became the Reverend Jim when he had the marijuana lace brownies. So that's when I found out it was edible. So what are some other edibles out there now, Felicia?
I mean, innovation is taking over, right? So you can get a mint. I took a mint earlier when we were doing our CBD talk live. And I remember a time when I think like people would have been like, what? She's taking CBD right in front of us. Um, there's gummies, there's still the cookies. I mean, in many instances, the tinctures are still looked at as a form of an edible. I think the big thing that I always share with people isn't all of the different choices you have, but like being cognizant of what you're putting in your body. If there's a lovely candy bar and it tastes so good, but it tells you each little tiny square is, you know, 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams. And it also says, you know, be cautious, like eat one and then wait. You really need to wait. I think that's a bigger portion of the dialogue, because a lot of these products that people are coming out with, they taste good. I mean, I've had to pick up a friend from the emergency room, and this was like a 6'4" big guy who started eating the candy bar, and just, it was so good. And I was all like, but we told you just to eat like a bite, and it was like perforated a little bit so you can tell the difference. He was like, but it was so good and I didn't feel anything. Well, how long did you wait? You know, so it becomes just being more cognizant and reading the labels and being aware of what you're putting in your body. Slow and steady wins the race. So I think it's one of those factors. But I mean, in terms of edibles, you think of it and it probably exists on a shelf somewhere.
Wow, innovation, right? Innovation at its finest. And when we look at just absorption, like you were talking about, how can you tell if a topical product being sold will actually be absorbed in the bloodstream?
I mean, that's one of those other questions, or that's one of those questions that, because there hasn't been enough study in terms of how it goes through the blood-brain barrier in particular, that I think a lot of it, and what we're finding, like I always tell people, like I live with a topical, right? Like this weather has really done something to my body in conjunction with the pandemic, and I'm getting tendonitis flares. I'm feeling it. Some mornings it's been really hard to just get up and have that kind of movement. And I think for a lot of us, it's just going to be a function of putting it on and doing the same method of slow and steady. Um, because the skin is the biggest organ that we have, and there really hasn't been enough research surrounding how do we know. I think I would treat it the same way you would treat anything else. If you're going to put Voltaire on, that you're not going to put all kinds of it. You're just going to put enough so that you see it evaporating on your skin or rubbing into your skin. So I think with cannabis medicine in particular, with the balms, the topicals, that's the safest route. I do know, I'll share with you, they've also come up with, because like, again, innovation, right? Like little patches. So you can throw a patch on your body, in particular on your skin, and what does it say? Wait a few hours. But because there hasn't been enough studies, I really can't answer that question. Like probably the way they'd want to hear the answer. It's just kind of telling people like, hey, we've got to push for federal legalization. We have to push for studies so that our doctors are educated about this and can actually answer us.
And when we look at Felicia, the disabled community, and especially the children, is there any particular benefit to kids with cerebral palsy when it comes to cannabis?
I think that because all of us who are we're all of us are human, right? And every human has an endocannabinoid system in particular. And most bodies, especially bodies that have autoimmune disorders or varying diseases, have endocannabinoid deficiencies. That cannabis is a good start for everybody. I mean, it's not necessarily a fix-all. Like to tell people like, hey, if you're taking certain prescription medications that work for you, um, but you want to get off of them, you would titrate slowly. So I'd say with children with CP, it's a good start for them to just take the medicine and see how their body responds. I think with a lot of muscle related issues, putting some balm on your child, providing them with relief. I mean, I would imagine that a lot of individuals who have different conditions, maybe they can't communicate what's going on. They're not going to be able to express or share with you what they're feeling, but that they have inflammation. And we know that cannabis, it has anti-inflammatory properties. I'd say it's a safe option, a safe and natural option to apply to your child in particular. Now, I mean, every law is different in every state, and a lot of states will tell you, if you can go in and buy it and you're a grown up, it's for you as a grown up. It's not for you to share with your baby. You should take your baby to go to the doctor and get whatever clearance that the doctors are providing so that your child can take this and you can feel safe about it. But then there are also options that are, over the counter CBD options that are just a good starting point to just see how your body's going to respond. And to determine whether or not you should go that extra step and get doctor's authorization to take something that has some THC in it. But I've seen so many children with so many different conditions really benefit from using this medicine and it being a good option, not just for them, but for the whole family dynamic. Because I've known moms who've given it to their kids and you're like, they're stressed out because their kid can't tell them what's going on, or, just a bunch of things. And like to tell a mom like, hey, why don't you try it for you? Like, you are a human too. You have an endocannabinoid system. And I can guarantee you that that beautiful baby that grew inside of you can benefit, like they're benefiting, you're going to be able to benefit as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Felicia. And I just want to let our viewers know that Tara, Texas, Tara is the sponsor of this segment right here. And make sure you go to the booth after Felicia and I continue our chat and everything. And you can go check out some of the great things that they have over there. All right, Felicia, somebody wants your opinion about Jaden Juice and Epidoltex. About, I hope I said it right. How do they compare? Did I say it right?
No, um, but I can't say it right either. So
Okay.
we're both in good company. Um, so Epidolix, I think that is made by the like Charlotte's Web. I think. I mean, somebody will have to clarify for me, but I think that's who makes it. And then Jaden's Juice is made by his dad. So in terms of how are they different, I mean, everybody's going to respond differently. So it becomes a function of as long as the products are tested and you know that they pass the test and don't have anything. I honestly can't compare the two. So yeah, I was like, it's like comparing apples and oranges, you know, like I like apples and I like oranges. And I've tried both of the products. So I wouldn't say I would be using it for the same reason probably this parent is asking in particular, because this is typically medicine for your child. I know that there are a lot of message boards available online on different social media platforms to engage with other parents that are utilizing cannabis medicine. If you want to email me, because I don't remember things off of the top of my head all the time, but if you want to email me, I can plug you into some of the groups that might be able to give you better feedback because they've, you know, compared the two. I typically don't compare the two. I'm a solid when it comes to I use the same product. I've been using the same product for the last 5 years for myself.
All right, Felicia. So they keep coming in for you. I mean, you are popular, but you got to be the most popular one. I got all these questions for you. Here's another one. Uh, do you need to increase dosage to maintain benefits?
Yes and no. I mean, after a certain point, titrating up over and over again, obviously, if you're having to use more, you're spending more, right? Like you're spending more money. So one of the big things that a lot of medical professionals, because I'm not a medical professional, guys, like I'm a cannabis patient who's worked with medical professionals and then helped hold people's hands as they've utilized cannabis medicine, is to take a break. Take 2 days off, like give your body an opportunity to just go to, to go back to homeostasis, like to for it to feel good about it. So for example, you know, once a month I take 2 days off so that I don't have to consume as much. So I highly suggest taking 2-3 days off. Now I know not everybody feels comfortable, especially if your child has epilepsy and you know that this is really helping with their seizures. So there's certain instances, but if you can take a break, take a break and give your body that break, give your pocket that break so that you can definitely go back to the medicine, have that same relationship, and maybe be able to titrate back down and start from a lower dose.
Felicia, when it comes to possible interaction with other medication, where can a person go to, or who could they ask to make sure that the cannabis is not interacting with something else they're taking?
So there are some other groups like Ed mentioned. A lot of moms are so determined, and then there's lots of moms who are medical professionals. So I know that I have gotten some of the best information from moms and who are nurses who have been studying this medicine on themselves and how these drugs interact. So some of these other groups will have a chart that lets you know, hey, this particular prescription drug goes through the same portal that the cannabis would. So it's going to go through the same receptor. And when that happens, you know, a couple of things can happen. It can either amplify the drug that you're taking or amplify the drug that you're taking. And sometimes in many instances, you don't want that to happen at all. And again, that's another request that somebody can make to me directly. I know that we we're given a chart. I don't know how new it is. I would probably have to look at it and then point you to one of the other organizations that do a little bit more of the hand holding. Some of these specific things in particular, as we know, because it's federally illegal, it's very dicey to have these types of open conversations. As somebody who's not a medical professional, but I know that I have a chart that we've utilized to be able to say these drugs go through the same pathways. So you probably want to visit a doctor to talk about it so that you can titrate off of those doses of pharmaceuticals while utilizing cannabis and enhancing it properly.
And Felicia, we know during this pandemic, it has festered into increased anxiety. Has cannabis use went up during this time? What's been your opinion?
I mean, the numbers say that it has. I mean, it right in the beginning of the pandemic, like the sales numbers were really up, right? They've kind of plateaued a little bit, but they experienced all that growth before they plateaued. So I'd say a lot of people were looking for options, right? Like nobody wanted to sit at home and uh, do whatever it is that, I know a lot of people will drink or will eat or, whatever, that this utilizing cannabis, maybe going to sleep, maybe feeling a little bit more relaxed was an easy option, especially because they were deemed an essential business in a lot of places. So allowing those businesses to be open in particular afforded a lot more people an opportunity to be introduced to something different. And then, I mean, I feel like a lot of people thought maybe the world is going to end, so I might as well. I've never smoked a joint. I've never, eaten an edible, and they just thought, well, I might as well do it now. It's now or never. And I'd say that, a lot of those people probably made a really good mental health choice for themselves by utilizing some cannabis, because this has been, the circumstances in which we're all existing in right now are nothing that we've ever seen in my lifetime and probably a lot of people's lifetimes. So I think it's a way to get the medical benefits for a lot of folks who don't even realize that that's what it is. And it's also for those of us who are utilizing the medicine in particular, it's also afforded us an opportunity to be able to be really comfortable and vocal and let people know that, hey, I'm glad that you're having fun and using this, but did you know that it was helping you with your wellness? Do you know that it was actually helping you with some of that anxiety and depression that we're dealing with? So yes, my friends who own businesses say that business has been good.
And on that note, we got another question about business. Is it expensive? Is cannabis expensive?
It's more expensive than it should be.
Mm-hmm.
That is the reality. That it's unfortunate that a lot of our government and our local elected officials, our national elected officials, our state elected officials don't really treat this as the medicine that it is. And what it has done is it's afforded so many people an opportunity to experiment, right? But it's also blocked out those of us who need this for medicine, that might be on fixed incomes, that can't really spread it the way that we used to. For example, I live in Los Angeles, so I live in cannabis mecca of the world. And I've been a part of this industry before it was an industry. When it was all about compassion, I got to get involved in 1995, the year before cannabis medicine was legalized in California. A lot of people don't even recognize that or realize that this was actually medicine, and a bunch of people fought for access for sick people to have something that was affordable. So we've strayed away from that. It's unfortunate because when I look at how much I pay in taxes, I tell people grow your own if you can, just because of the expense associated with it. But I also know that not everybody can. And fortunately for us, there are groups. And if you go to our booth, we have a video. I believe we have a video with an organization out here in California that makes medicine, that gives away medicine. I know that we're in talks with other groups that want to work with us to be able to figure out pathways to be able to give away medicine to folks who can't afford it, because it's, when you're talking about a state tax and then you're paying a local tax and you're looking at that receipt and you're like, wow, I just spent $30 on taxes on a $75 ticket, and you're doing the math. It's unfortunate to know that that our government doesn't necessarily recognize that this is necessary medicine for some of us. So I mean, right now there's a luxury tax associated with cannabis, is the best way to put it. And it's going to take a lot of voices like ours to really stay on top of our government, to make sure that they recognize that not all of us are there to just have access to something that we would use recreationally or under the adult use model, that this is actually our medicine and that it should be given to us at a much lower rate.
Thank you, Felicia. Definitely appreciate you sharing that. And we only have about a few minutes left. So we have all these questions. So if everyone can make sure they visit the Cetera, Texas booth, and you can find out some more information about what Felicia is talking about, as well as some other questions that you can have answered. And Felicia, I want to take the remaining few minutes to turn it back over to you to see if there's anything else you'd like to tell the viewers, the listeners, about the Social Impact Center or just cannabis in general that we didn't have a chance to touch on.
Sure. Well, there's a question that came out in the chat. So I'd like to address that because I know that it's something that's being talked about a lot in terms of the question is, I'm concerned with the companies and products I'm buying, that they're owned by white people and adding to the racial wealth gap because communities of color face being incarcerated for cannabis. Do you need brands, companies that are owned by Black or brown people? So yes, yes, and yes. The reality is that cannabis has afforded it a unique opportunity for people who already have generational wealth to invest in the space. And it's important for those of us who do come from marginalized communities. I'm an Indigenous person, so like this is right up my alley. And I definitely know lots of Black and brown people who own businesses across this country. And it's going to be very important for us to support them in particular as we move forward, because this is a time for natural medicines. And, people aren't that cognizant. I'm going to get a little political so people can tune off or get upset. I don't really care. That, this plant comes from regions in our world that this plant is indigenous to specific people. And with that comes thousands and thousands of years worth of knowledge that has been passed down from generation to generation. So I say that to say that, if somebody's doing something good and giving back to the community, it's great, independent of what their racial background is. But I think right now we live in a time where it's very important to be cognizant of small businesses. Typically, a lot of the small cannabis businesses in particular are owned by Black and brown communities, and they need to be recognized and acknowledged for the contributions that they've made in particular to this medicine and the sacrifices, because we don't talk about that enough, that communities of color made big sacrifices. And now that we have this booming industry and this huge opportunity, this is a $1 billion industry just in the United States alone. So it's like to acknowledge that and to figure out how do we support one another. So, I mean, please check out my booth, whoever answered that question. We'll be here all weekend. We definitely dive deep into the intersectional issues surrounding our communities. We don't just talk about cannabis, we talk about a lot of things that all sit at this intersection of, health equity, racial equity, social equity, environmental justice, and everything else you can think of, all wrapped into one, and in a way to create an inclusive, safe space where everybody feels loved, heard, and accepted for their contribution. So I appreciate you guys so much for bringing me on, Paul. It's great to see you again. I'm
Same here,
super
my friend.
excited. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. And stay well, stay safe, my friend, and look forward to catching up with you soon. Okay.
Definitely. Thank you.
All right. Don't forget to go check out Felicia at the booth at the Satara, Texas booth.
No,
Go
the
there.
Social Impact Center booth.
Social Impact Center. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. The Social Impact Center. And don't forget that this segment was sponsored by Satara, Texas. You definitely want to check them out too. And don't forget, coming up in about 15 minutes, we're going to be joined by a legend from the ADA, James Jim Wiseman. He's going to be joining us talking about some of the things that the community is still doing, the fight that we're in, and just a wealth of experience. So do me a favor, go to the exhibit hall, go see Felicia at the Social Impact Center, go visit Satara, Texas, go visit everyone there. But do me a favor, be back here in 15 minutes so we can keep it going. All right. So we'll be back 15 minutes. Take care, folks.